Welcome back. The doctor is in. Today I'm talking about writing BattleTech Objectives Draconis Combine. This was a real long and involved project to put together. It has an interesting history. Before the Objectives series began, I went to DragonCon, and one of the other BattleTech writers at the time, Nick Marsala, was there, and we were hanging out, and he mentioned that he wanted to update the Objective Raids book that was written by Jeff Layton in the 90s, but use PDFs to break it down by faction. And he asked if I would be interested in it. I expressed interest, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then he put together Objectives Capellan Confederation, and that was the first in the series, and I was asked to write Objectives Draconis Combine. So I was the second one in the series. And if I remember right, I was working on this before the Capellan Confederation product was finished. So I didn't really have much more than a format to base what I was working on. And I'll get into some of the other specifics, but I just want to get into... So it starts with a text section where you kind of discuss the nation at this period during the Jihad. And this is set slightly after the Field Report series. So sort of contemporary, but if you even note here in the first paragraph, it's clear that the Field Reports came out before the Objectives, both in real-time and in-universe. So here's what was really a difficult thing, because at the time we didn't really have searchable PDFs of every book. We didn't really have sources to determine where everything was. You had to go through all the books, and I was lucky that at this point I had every book that had ever been published, and I could go through everything, but you had to go through everything. This was a really involved production process. You had to look up every factory. Did they still exist after the Jihad? Had they moved production during the Jihad? So you couldn't just look at old sources. You had to look at the most recent sources for information. On top of that, you had to determine how much damage they may have sustained during the Jihad. That's what this page is primarily about. And this is broken down by military district in the Draconis Combine. We even got the ones that are temporary facilities that were shuttered. A lot went into putting this together, and then we get into the actual state of things. And here's where things got even more involved than what I've already talked about. For every factory, we had to create a planet, and most of them, the planet was known, but not every planet had all of these characteristics assigned already. Some of them did, and that saved time because we could just copy and paste. Others had some of this, but not all of it, so you had to create the rest. And some of these had none of this information, so you had to create it all. And that's an involved process. You have to look at how long it went. Is there any information about when this world was colonized that will help you determine what the population might be and all that sort of thing? Is there a reference of the world that describes it as a breadbasket world or a factory world or something like that? So it may not have all of this information, but you have at least some feature that you need to take into account when generating this information. It's a very complex and interrelated series of data that you have to collate and compile before you can even begin writing. And it was a lot involved. And then they had to create a lot of these insignias for the various companies. Now that wasn't me, that was the layout folks. I believe Ray Arastia created these when he did the layout for those that didn't already exist. And of course, Ray Arastia is now the line developer for BattleTech. So here you see, it's planet after planet, And sometimes you have to go into detail for the specific companies. You had to list everything they produced. You had to list where on the planet. So you described the planet. You had to pick which continent they were on. You had to give it a city. So basically what we were doing is we were making a nightmare for later writers to have to refer to when they describe or mention any of the things we were putting together, instead of having the freedom to say, oh, it's in this city or on this continent. Now everything is, at least as of this time period, everything is detailed. And so maybe that's something I wouldn't have been in favor of now that I've been writing for longer and I know what a fact-check nightmare some of these things become. But at the time, this was really getting into the nuts and bolts of the BattleTech universe, and I really enjoyed it at the time. But looking back, I almost wonder, how did I have the patience to put all of this together? I mean, look at all these planets I created. And I didn't create all of these, but I did create a lot of them. And, some of these were probably more generic than others, but I put the time in. For instance, Luthien is well detailed. That didn't require me to create anything except possibly summarize in a very small amount of space here this little paragraph underneath everything else. Then we've got, and there was one academy for the Draconis Combine that I did not mention, and people online have said, hey, how come this wasn't mentioned? No one ever asked me directly, but I'm going to tell you now, it had never been given a location before, and I could have given it a location and pinned it down. Instead, I decided not to do that, to leave it kind of a mystery. That was not something I discussed with anyone. I just omitted it, and that's the way it has remained. I didn't want to change the mystery. I wanted to leave that little mystery there, so I just left it completely out. And you can see that every planet gets its own little... And some of these, like this Blankenberg technologies, I have a feeling I might have discussed with Ray creating this. I can't remember for sure, because I know we went back and forth on logos like this on other products. I don't remember if this was one that I specifically said, take this and put a battle mech into it. And it's a lot of... And there's a lot of dead space in here. Again, I like to fill up all the space with information. The fact that there's dead space on this has always kind of bothered me, but that's because we didn't have word counts to fill pages. We didn't know how much space these were going to take up when we were writing them, certainly these first few. And that's why there are blank spots on some of these pages. Here's Galtor 3, so here I was able to use what I wrote for Historical Turning Points Galtor. I just had to expound upon it a little bit. I even refer to the information that I already previously expanded in that HTP here in this paragraph. And you can just see this is just a really, really dense amount of information. We weren't just talking about factories and continents. We were also talking about where the military academies were. We were talking about where training grounds. It's a lot of information crammed into as small a space as we could manage. And here you've got strategic worlds. Kaznajoy is a prefecture capital, so this is one of these planets that's not filled with factories, but it still is an important world, so it had to be mentioned and given a description, and likewise for most of these others. And you see, and it's just 40 pages of text, and then here there's another text-heavy page describing what's coming up in the future. Now, a lot of the rules annex was copy and paste from the Capellan Confederation, so Nick wrote most of this originally. The problem is you have to go into it and customize it, so where there are examples, you have to change them to be worlds or factories of the Draconis Combine instead of the Capellan Confederation, and I believe I missed one, and so I think one of the references in this is an inaccurate, that it refers to a planet from the Capellan Confederation. So not everybody's on the ball all the time. We also had to go into what it's like on these various worlds, what kind of local defenses are there, what kind of corporate security, what kind of militia units do they have. And then they put these maps in that show all the worlds with all the locations of all the different factories, and then there's symbols indicating, well, here's a BattleTech factory, here's a aerospace fighter factory, here's a dropship factory. Then we've got capital worlds, so there's so much information contained in this product that it's a gold mine for people who really want everything spelled out and fixed, but it's kind of a minefield for writers who want the freedom to create a city on the fly for a short story and say that that's where the factory is located, or something like that. So again, it was really interesting to do, but looking back, it's something that just added to the hundreds of thousands of words of minutia that you have to take into account when you're writing anything set in this period or later. That's just a fact of life. Writing for BattleTech, after you've been doing it for a while, you don't even really pay attention to it. It just becomes part of the routine. But it's one thing to consider. Whenever you're going into writing for a game company, you have to service everything that came before. It's not just what came since. It's everything that has ever been, and there can be a lot. So that's all I really have for today. I'd like to just once more mention Cats of War 2, my newest book. It's been out for a few weeks now. These are 4 brand new tales of military fantasy and military science fiction with a feline twist. So we've got cats and cat people in savage combat. I'm really proud of this book. It's novel length, it's 50,000 words. It's got a new Warpiper novella in it. I'm very proud of this book. I really hope you'll give it a look and let me know what you think of it. Until then, the Doctor is out.